So this is the plan stage weekly meeting for the um, 18th of December 2019. First of all, team updates. As I mentioned before, I'm moving to the scalability team on the 1st of January. We are looking for a new engineering manager to replace me. The position's open. We've got some people in the pipeline. John Hope is going to take interim management of the project management team until we do, because, you know, honestly, even if we found somebody today who we were determined would be the new engineering manager, they won't have started by the 1st of January. John, did you want to add anything about the hiring process so far as you've seen it? Or?
Just we have a good few candidates in, high quality candidates, but as you said, like realistically, even if we got a hire by January, it's going to be, depending on their notice period, could be the end of February. So yeah, other than that, no updates.
Cool, thank you. Gabe, you're up next.
All right, so just wanted to walk through the 12.7 release planning issue real quick. I'll go ahead and open that up and share my screen. Running another experiment for warning to see if I can get my computer to lock up or not lock up. So we'll see. Cool. All right, so you should be able to see this. I think we have added our kickoff videos if you want to check those out. At least for project management, I put my two main direction pages links there. In terms of validation cycles, we're going to start looking at doing to-dos and notifications and overhauling that in anticipation of maybe like starting in 12.8, 12.9. But we're going to start this with the problem validation, and then we'll move into solution validation. Same thing with automatic triaging and labeling of issues. That will be further out, but we're going to start some of the validation cycles now. In terms of design priorities, we need to wrap up the work on multiple milestones per issue or merge requests. I think we're doing the initial data migration now to prepare for that, and we're pretty close. I went ahead and broke out a bunch of follow-on work there, like improving how, you know, filtering works, like on issue lists and issue boards and that sort of thing with multiple milestones. And then after we kind of wrap that work up, I want to move over to some design work on adding first class support for issue task lists and tasks. In terms of features, goal is to get one field, any field, updating in real time, using kind of whatever tech stack we end up landing on for that, but just one field is a proof of concept. And then complete the MVCs for multiple milestones and milestone types. It's important to get that done in 12.7 in anticipation of a demo we're doing for Gartner in January 24th. And then adding burn-up charts to milestones. So I think the legwork has already started here. The design's done for the burn-up charts. As soon as we're collecting those events and that work gets done, we can move on to the front-end portion of it. Keenan, I don't believe is here. But I'll just kind of run through his stuff right quick. Design priorities would be show milestones on a roadmap. You can kind of check that out if you want to know more. Providing confidential epics, so issues can be confidential, epics can't. We need to kind of have parity there. And then there's also this interesting feature for having a field that updates the health status of an issue. So you can kind of check that out, but it could be interesting. That's in solution validation, I believe, right now. So that may or may not get all the way through in 12.7. Mark, do you want to talk about anything with Certify?
Yeah, I mean, our design priorities right now are really just to continue trying to get the service desk enterprise ready. We've got a couple of issues out there, both internal and external, where we're trying to kind of bring some new features that make it more of an enterprise solution. We're continuing to work through requirements management research issue, which is going well. And then we're excited for our blocking issue support. So there's a couple more sort of follow-on issues there that iterate on the MVC. So hopefully that will make blocking issues a real thing that is very usable for everybody. Service desk, we're doing a couple more things in the service desk to kind of make it more configurable, configurable email address, and we're fixing a bug that was found. And then the biggest thing really for us is the requirements management piece. We're going to kick off the MVC, hopefully this release. I believe it's pretty much ready to go. We have a little design work to finish up on that, and then we should be in good shape.
Cool. Is there any questions about that 12.7 related items that are worth discussing or just having a conversation about if anyone's interested? Nope. All right, cool. Mark, I think you have the next item, and I added this on your behalf given
Thank you.
the Slack chat.
Excellent. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. So I'll try to. Can everybody see that? Okay. So this is the direction page for requirements management. This has been updated relatively recently. I'm sure that there will always be more updates coming, so it will continue to change so people can keep looking back at this. But the overall strategy here is that in general, for customers who need requirements, there's a large amount of friction that exists between your requirements management tool and your configuration database and your repositories. And in the requirements management space, one of the major goals of requirements is to tie them to source code and to tie them to your testing so that you can see if I have a requirement, where is it tested, where is it implemented. If the requirement changes, you want to be able to trace and say, hey, this requirement changed, what source code files need to change, what tests need to change, and actually do that regression analysis. So one of the major things we're trying to leverage here is because we're a unified DevOps tool chain, we should be able to put all of that into one tool, which would make it much better for sort of the space out there right now. Nobody's really doing that. Integrations between some of the major players like Doors don't integrate back into any sort of a Git repository or things like that. So it makes it very difficult to kind of trace back and forth. So that's sort of our mission. For people who aren't familiar with requirements management, there's a link to a good article from PMI here. But effectively what it is a lot of regulated industries and even those people outside of regulated industries will write requirements for their features. And we sort of do this right now with issues. We kind of put the design in the issues, and we put some of the things that need to work for it to be considered complete. That's a process that works well in an informal world, but in a much more formal world, they want actual requirements that are under revision control. So this is an opportunity for us to introduce that. And that's sort of the whole point of requirements, is to have that regression ability, to have that traceability between different artifacts within your repository. So as I came out of aerospace, I figured I'd start off with an aerospace use case. I'd like to add more of these as we do further customer interviews. But for regulated industries, there's usually standards that they have to follow. In the case of aerospace and a few other mission critical type things, it's the RTCA's DO 178 B or C. People are migrating towards C. And this is sort of the overall requirement. Well, it's not even just based on requirements. It's the overall process you must follow in order to get your flight control or other aerospace critical items certified by the FAA, EASA, ANAC, or any of the other cert agencies, Air Transport Canada. In order for that plane to fly within their airspace, they have to certify everything. And in order to do this, they must be able to show that you've defined your requirements, you've implemented those requirements, you've verified those requirements and tested to them. So the most common trace paths that are used all the time is the system level requirements, which are effectively the airplane models for an aerospace control system or other system level models. And those get broken down into high level software requirements, which are what's going to happen in this particular box on an airplane in this particular functionality of that box. From there, they get broken down even further into low level requirements, otherwise known as design. You can do it either way. There must be traceability up to the high level requirements. So you'll break down or decompose a high level requirement, say, okay, that's going to be done by the following 3 smaller requirements. And then you would have to trace your source code that implements those requirements to the low level requirements. And then you'd trace the executable object code to the source code. So you can see there's a lot of traceability required here. From a testing perspective, which is where you get audited, is they will say, okay, here's the high and low level requirements. What test cases test that? Which procedures are implementing those test cases? And where are the results of those procedures? And do they pass or fail? So aerospace is a bit odd. You can't have any, quote, dead code or unused code. Every line of code must trace to a requirement. You can't have any code that doesn't trace directly to a requirement. So it's very regulated in that sense. During audits, the teams are asked to demonstrate this ability. So you'll sit before the FAA and they'll say, okay, here's your system level requirement. Show me how you're A, meeting the requirement, and B, validating and testing that requirement. And you have to show them within a tool how your process dictates that all of that was done correctly. Any questions as I go through this?
I have a quick
Feel free to jump
question.
in if there's questions.
Are we going to collaborate together with the Verify team in terms of the test case, test procedures, and things like that? Or is it something that is going to be like from the client perspective, something that they have implemented outside of GitLab?
We are hoping to collaborate with the Verify team because they're looking for artifact creation and artifact capturing, and that is part of this. So yes, as we iterate on requirements, we're starting at the very high level, just create requirements, link them to each other, and link them to some source code. As we get further down the path here, yes, we'll definitely want to create or collaborate closely with them, because what I'd love to see, and nobody offers this could be a huge thing for us, is you have the CI/CD pipeline that runs tests, and in those tests, those pipelines either pass or fail. And if those pipelines can be tied to requirements, and those tests can be tied to requirements, you could look at your requirement and actually click through and say, okay, this requirement is tested in this pipeline by this test and it passed. So that requirement is, let's say, green. And this requirement was tested, but it failed. That one could be red. And this requirement is untested, so it would be, I don't know, another color. So we could really leverage this all together, and that could be part of your artifact collection. So in aerospace, at least, the test results are artifacts. They need to be collected. So yes, we'll definitely have to collaborate closely with the Verify team as we get further into the traceability aspects.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I also went ahead and defined some key terms and concepts for people who are not as familiar with requirements lingo. It can be a bit confusing at first. The really big thing to point out is one of the key deliverables in every certification effort is this traceability matrix, which is essentially a giant spreadsheet looking thing that shows the traceability in a matrix form. And that has to be delivered to the customer and to the cert agencies prior to going into an audit. So that's a required thing that we need to have as an output from our tools eventually, not right away, obviously. So where do we start with all this? Currently, we don't have any sort of requirements management within GitLab, and that's sort of why we're here. So we're in the early stages. We're doing a lot of customer interviews. They've been really informative. They've been actually very interesting. And we've been talking to customers about what they're looking for. So our first step is simply building out the requirements structure. So at a group level, this would just be a basic tree structure of requirements. And that would get us to what I would consider minimal maturity. Now, I know we're changing how we're defining maturity levels, so we'll have to work through that. But that's sort of the minimum thing that we could present to people where they could use it. From there, we're looking to integrate and link with other artifacts within GitLab, test cases, test results, and to achieve some level of traceability. And these iterations are going to start us working toward that viable maturity category where people could actually utilize this in a regulated industry. From there, the sky is kind of the limit. So we'll have to kind of see what our user research shows as we go forward past that. Also related to this category are the release governance from release, in particular the concepts related to evidence and artifact collection. So that kind of goes back to your point. Evidence collection needs to be able to be traced to. So you have to trace to these artifacts and this evidence. So we'll have to work closely with them. And then as I was thinking through this, I kind of figured, what do we need for an MVC? And what are all the functionality we could potentially implement? It doesn't have to be done. Not all of this is absolutely required to make the category viable, or even further than that. But at a bare minimum, we need to be able to have the concept of, requirements that are active or archived. We need to have unique requirement identification somehow, because you never can lose a requirement. That's kind of one of the tenets. Even if you decide to change it or delete it, it still has to be in the system somewhere. And that ID is what is used throughout all these tracing steps. And when you're talking to a team, you'll say, hey, how is requirement, high level requirement 77, where is that traced? So there needs to be some sort of a unique identifier. And then there needs to be some sort of requirements text, which is the actual requirement. And then from a development perspective, the developer needs to be able to add, archive, or edit those requirements. So that's sort of the basic, what do we need to get off the ground? And that's why I was showing this. Those are in red here. And then as we move further, some of these other functionalities will become much more important. So I briefly talked through long-term goals. We want to make sure they can be managed at all relevant levels, so they can trace up or trace down. We want to make sure that test results and code files have that same ability to be traced to or traced from. The other thing is we need to be able to have some sort of visual representation of traceability and test coverage. this goes back to the idea of integrating it with the CI/CD pipelines and showing how those pass or fail requirements, which would be a really awesome feature to add. I do have a bit about competitive landscape. There's not a lot of tools out there that are widely used in regulated industries. I know there's a lot of tools used to manage requirements in other industries, but the main competitors are IBM Rational Doors, which is pretty much where everybody's at right now. And there is a JAMA Connect tool, which integrates sort of with Jira, but it's not widely utilized because it doesn't actually allow importing and exporting from Doors correctly. And since at some level, every program uses Doors, that's been a major limiting factor for them. We are doing more in the analyst landscape. We've been working closely with some of the analysts to kind of figure out where the market is going with requirements. There's not a lot of movement here. A lot of these industries using this are very regulated, and therefore things that come don't tend to go away easily. They don't switch tools for these types of things very often. So there's not a lot in that industry. What we're looking more for the analysts to do is tell us what else is used for the less regulated industries, people who are trying to implement like GDPR and want to have requirements behind that. And I do have the minimum maturity level linked here. There's an Epic out there. I've been putting things in so people can click through that. There's no issues out there yet because we don't have anything for people to write issues against. And then internal customers, the quality department is experimenting with the idea of requirements management. So we'd like to collaborate with them as we move forward. And hopefully they can help us dog food this as we move forward, because they'd be one of the first people probably internally who'd want to get on board with this. I also hope to use this on the certified team just so we can dog food our own product and people can really understand it. So I also have our requirements at the group level Epic, which is what we're hoping to implement in 12.7. And then I also have a link here to the initial discussion I had. I did a YouTube thing. It's on Unfiltered that kind of discusses what our requirements. So if people who haven't been in a call like this where I've gone through it or just want further reference, they can go ahead and watch that. Any questions?
You mentioned that the output is sometimes provided to the external authorities. Is there some standardized output in which they expect this?
Yes and no. I mean, most tools will import CSV files. The issue comes down to one of the reasons Doors has retained its sort of spot is it supports the idea of creating attributes for requirements. And so some projects will have tons and tons of attributes. Things like safety critical or needed for first flight are things we used a lot. But when you export those, they don't export correctly from most tools. And then Doors can't pull them in and see that those are attributes on a requirement. So as we go through this, we're working kind of hard to figure out how can we have a flexible system that allows us to, down the road, support attributes on top of just, requirement identifier and text. Oftentimes, large industry needs attributes to define further subsets. It's almost like labels, but they can contain lots of text. So what a lot of people do in Doors right now, because it doesn't integrate correctly with their configuration management tools, is one of their attributes is, verification evidence, and it'll actually link to a link in their Jira database or a link in their other databases that shows things. They'll have safety analysis, which will be a block of text for each requirement that is tagged safety critical, where the safety team has gone through and given their analysis of the requirement. People put their test strategies for each requirement within Doors sometimes, using it more of a spreadsheet tool. But when they export all those things, they want them to come back into whatever tool set they're using. So we'll have to work through this. I think if we go the file-based approach like we're talking about with some sort of like standardized YAML or JSON type concept for attributes, because those don't really share across different requirement documents. They're contained within one document. They don't really link in and out. They're just additional attributes. It would be very easy for us or for our customers to write import scripts that would pull things in and fill out the appropriate YAML fields or JSON fields without too much grief. That's sort of the idea now. We'll iterate on it, I'm sure, many times.
Cool, thanks.
Absolutely. So if there's any questions on any of this, just let me know. If you have suggestions, I'd love to hear them. Unfortunately, I spent much of my life dealing only with requirements, so I'm happy to answer any questions people have.
This is Cormac. I put this in the notes as well, but when you do interview other customers about this, I'd love to sit in if you don't mind having a marketing fly on the wall.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been working with some of our sales reps, so I'll definitely get you on the list if you're interested.
Cool. Thank you. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Excellent. Anything else? Guess we'll move along. Gabe, it looks like you have the next item.
Yeah, based on kind of some conversations we've been having ongoing, there's some issues in the plan project just about capacity allocations and like wanting to dog feed that a little bit more and understand things. I started a merge request so that hopefully the engineering managers can add like specifically how capacity is planned for, and then like what our historical capacity has been and our approach to that. This is like in response to an ongoing, lots of teams ask me how that works and I don't know entirely. And then I also know like sometimes we overestimate our capacity or underestimate our capacity, and it's kind of like a black box. And so I think being a little bit more transparent about that process would be helpful. And then we're also going to use whatever, like however it's currently working to build out some models in Periscope so that we can start having some dashboards for this. I think in one of the issues we talked about, maybe looking at issue weight is like a standard progress metric that both like that cross-functional teams align behind. So based on John's comment, I agree that it should or could go on team pages, or we can roll it up onto a single one. I don't really have a preference. It's whatever y'all want to do. But I think just like being transparent about it and the process would be really helpful. Does anybody have any feedback about that or pushback?
I think it's a good idea. I'm very aware that like as I do this, I'll be mostly able to list the flaws that I haven't fixed yet and won't be fixing. Yeah, but I think it's good to have those explicit anyway, so we know what we're missing.
Yeah, I think like a
sorry.
Periscope page would be like a Periscope dashboard would be ideal for this kind of thing. I'd really like to see that. The reason I brought up the team page thing was just because, like, given an issue that has front end and back end and is in portfolio management, like I know Donald's going to count the weight on that towards his capacity. I'm going to count the weight on it towards my capacity, but I'll also add in the things that are only back end, and he'll also only add the things that are front end. So his idea of what his team can accomplish in a milestone is different from what I think mine can, and that's why I suggested team pages instead.
I think
that's fine with me. I don't have a preference. So
yeah, I think it's kind of a challenge because the sort of details belong to the teams, but then the output belongs to the PM, which spans teams. Like, because from Gabe and Mark's perspective, and Keenan as well, who's not here, like their concern is like, can we do this stuff? Not can we do the back end stuff, or can we do the front end stuff? So it's difficult to balance those two out, but hopefully we can come up with a good solution.
And this part of also the issue tasks and issue task lists. One of the goals of that is to make it so that you can like have a task list and weight each task separately, and then those would all aggregate into the overall issue weight. So it's easier to like split out front end, back end work, but have that combined into an aggregate. I found over time that it doesn't really, like you can split it up on a per team basis, but like the cross-functional group, it will normalize out to be the same type of velocity regardless of if you like treat them separately. So that's kind of where like I don't want to use it to look at each team. I want to use it to look at the aggregate as a whole, kind of like what John was saying. So wherever y'all feel like it's best for that to live, I really don't have a strong preference. Just that we like get it down and documented it, and then I think Donald volunteered to help me. I'll work on the Periscope page too, and I might hit you up too, John, if we get stuck. So.
Cool. So next week is the 25th of December, which is a holiday in a bunch of countries. The week after that is the 1st of January, which is a holiday in a bunch of countries. So I'm going to suggest that we cancel this call for the next 2 weeks on the assumption that a bunch of people won't be here. And then after that, I will move ownership of the calendar event and the meeting to Gabe so that he can run this going forward. Yeah, this is my last one. Thanks everybody. It's been great working with you. I'll still be working with you for another couple of weeks. We just won't have a weekly call. Have a good
Cool.
one.
Yeah, one other thing, sorry, right quick, before we go, is we did hire an external group product manager for Plan. So they'll be starting February 10th. I think his name's Justin. He's coming over from Zillow. So I would assume he probably will take ownership of the calendar event at that point, but I'm happy to shepherd it leading up to
Yeah.
that. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, we can keep transferring it as we go, but yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. All right. Have a great holiday, everybody.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.